Hi, and welcome to Ask Mr. Franchise. Our guest today is Andrew Miller, president of ACM Consulting Group. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure, Shawn. Great to be here.
Thanks. Andrew, can you tell us a bit about ACM and what it is that you guys do?
Sure. Well, it's a large boutique consulting firm of one.
A large boutique.
Large boutique consulting firm of one. So I'm a solo practitioner. The main focus of the practice is helping clients dramatically accelerate results. What that really means is I can be more responsive to my clients. My history is with a few of the large consulting firms. 4.5 years ago, I started ACM Consulting to be, frankly, more responsive to clients, to be able to have a direct impact in helping the clients achieve results as quickly as possible.
Now, you say becoming more responsive to clients. Was it a problem to be responsive to clients if you're within a big organization?
Well, when you're with a big consulting firm, you're generally one of two things. You're a rainmaker or you're a delivery person. So I happened to be a delivery person at that time in my career, so I was very successful at delivering results to clients, but there wasn't a lot of opportunity to actually choose the clients to work with, to actually develop opportunities within current clients or new clients. And I really felt like I wanted to be able to take on that whole role of working with clients, developing opportunities, finding out what their needs were, and really developing an approach that would best meet their needs as quickly as possible.
Now, looking at the franchise world, there's franchisees, there's franchisors, there's guests or customers, there's landlords, banks, there's all these different players out there. What is it that you bring to the franchise world?
I think it's really twofold, because I've worked with both franchisors and franchisees, and I think from a franchisor perspective, it's really helping them maximize, ensure the franchise model is repeatable, that they're getting high ROI for their investors, for their franchisees. It's also really helping them develop a model for qualifying franchisees. I think that's one important thing that maybe not enough franchisors take a look at is there is such a thing as a bad franchisee, so there has to be some kind of a model for qualifying them. On the franchisee side, it's really about maximizing the value of their business. Looking at, how do you develop effective customer acquisition techniques? How do you look at optimizing your operations, improving your customer service, leadership issues, management issues, strategy, operations issues?
When it comes to identifying those franchisees, can you tell us a bit about that? That sounds pretty interesting.
Identifying a qualified franchisee?
Qualifying.
Well, I think it's not really different than any other investment or any other business, in the sense that a qualified franchisee, depending on what kind of franchise you're looking to sell, has to be somebody that's willing to invest not only their money but their time in helping the brand. So where I've seen the franchisee-franchisor relationship really fall off is when the interests aren't aligned. So somebody comes in and they buy a franchise, and either they don't buy into the system that they've bought, so to speak, so they're trying to say, well, head office isn't doing the right things, I'm going to do something different, or when head office isn't giving the franchisee the support that they need. So I think that there needs to be, like any good relationship, there needs to be a bit of a courting period to make sure that it's not just about the franchisee coming forward and giving money, it's about that they really buy into the brand, that they really are going to commit to the time and effort that it takes to market, to maximize growth within their business, and that it's truly aligned with what the franchisor is looking for.
Very cool. Now, on the franchisee side of things, can you elaborate a bit more on that and how you help them maximize their ROI and realize their ROI?
Sure. I mean, I think the important thing around a franchisee is when you, obviously, as you know, when you buy a franchise, you're buying a system. So there's something repeatable. You're buying essentially the tactical, the operational side of the business. But that doesn't mean that you can just invest your money, buy your franchise, and all of a sudden customers are going to start walking through your door. So I think one of the important things on the franchisee side is really the marketing, the customer acquisition. Some franchisees buy the business, they expect things to work well, and they don't, and then they're surprised when they're not getting the return on investment that they expected, but at the same time, they're not investing in getting customers through the door. So I think, where I work a lot with them on is how do we most effectively, most cost efficiently increase customers coming through the door? What kinds of promotions can you use? What kind of methods can you use? Because not everybody comes in with a business or a marketing background. So I've found in my experience that's where a lot of the insight is required, advice is required on how can we actually get more customers through the door. The system will sort of take care of itself once we get them there, but we really want to increase the size of the business.
So your way of increasing their ROI is to get more customers through the door for them to service with the system that they invested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, when you're doing that, I imagine that there may be some fence mending needed between the franchisee and the franchisor.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a bit about that?
Well, I think it's interesting. It's an interesting question you ask, and I'll bring up an example. You may have read about what's going on in the States with Kentucky Fried Chicken. And there's a bit of a rift, let's say, between the franchisee and the corporate office. because the corporate office is saying, well, we're putting out a huge marketing strategy around healthy foods, grilled chicken, things like that. And for those of us that know KFC, you don't really make it synonymous with healthy eating and grilled chicken. And the franchisees are saying, well, this is confusing our customers, it's lowering our sales, because people are coming to us because they want the fried chicken with all the breaded stuff on it. So and actually it's gotten to the point where the franchisees have created their own marketing group, and they're actually suing corporate headquarters to get the rights to the marketing and the advertising strategy. So I think that is a clear case of a misalignment between what the franchisor is looking to do and what the franchisees actually want to do. And I think it's really important that those interests are aligned, because you see what happens when they're not.
Now, fried food obviously comes with a connotation. So the head office sounds like they're thinking in the long-term strategy, and the franchisees, it sounds like they're evaluating this more on what's been successful, so they're expecting that to continue to be successful.
Right.
What would be a fair compromise in that type of a scenario?
Well, I think a fair compromise is they need to sit down and talk about what is, do we actually see long-term growth in this area? So in that, to use the specific example again, the franchisees are saying people aren't coming to our restaurant for healthy food. They're coming to our restaurant because it's KFC, and
they're
this
not.
Is what you get.
KFC is a guilty pleasure, right?
Right.
The bucket's
Exactly.
a guilty pleasure. It's
I mean, their marketing strategies, we've got more calories in a sandwich than anybody else does, right? So, being somewhat facetious, but so I think, what needs to come to a head is that the two sides need to meet and say, what do we actually think the long-term strategy is? If corporate head office has some numbers to say, this is where the market is going, then they need to be able to show why they're actually changing the marketing strategy of the company and how it's going to actually positively impact those franchisees in the long run. Because what the franchisees are saying is, people don't go to fast food restaurants for healthy food. They go to fast food restaurants, like you said, it's an indulgent pleasure.
Yeah.
Right. So let's go to our core market. We're not going after the healthy food addict that's going to come here for grilled chicken. We're going after the person that really wants to enjoy their fried chicken sandwich or bucket of chicken.
So are you working with groups of franchisees and their head offices, or are you working with individual franchisees?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
So a couple of my clients are actually on both sides, where they actually are the franchisor, and they have what they call corporate franchises, which they run themselves, and a couple of others which are the individuals. So it's probably more on the working with other franchisor or an individual franchise to really optimize their business and really make sure that, like I said, that relationship is fully integrated and their interests are aligned.
Okay. And are you provided to the franchisee by the franchisor, or are your services something that a franchisee would have to pay for themselves?
It could be both.
Okay.
If an individual franchisee comes to me without sort of any relationship with head office through me, then yes, they would pay for the service, and obviously, again, maximizing ROI. But in a couple of cases, it has been the franchisor that said, go and work with a couple of our franchises, and let's maximize the investment for them and make sure that they're, again, the effective customer acquisition strategy, management, leadership, those kinds of things. Let's make sure they're getting the most out of their investment.
Okay. Now, when it comes to looking at all the different ways that you evaluate a franchise, a lot of people worry that you kind of pigeonhole yourselves into food service or printing services or home-based businesses. Is there a category that you specialize in?
No, none in particular, because I think, and I would say sort of generally, even outside of the franchise world, there's no area I specialize in, because what I really focus on with my clients is speed, efficiency, productivity. So that there's principles that apply to any business, right? Any business needs to bring in customers, however you define a customer. Every business needs to streamline their operations, whatever those operations might be. They have to have strong management. They have to have good leadership, right? They have to have a good strategy and be able to execute it. So there isn't a particular area that I look at. I've worked in food service with a couple of my clients. It's not that I focused on that. That's just where it happened to come from.
Now, being a large boutique, as you said,
That's right.
how scalable is your business? Could you take on a large amount of franchisees? Is that something that's within your ability to manage, or is it more one-on-one? Where do you see it going?
It really depends on, each client for me is different. So some clients is a lot more, let's say, labor intensive in terms of there's a lot more meetings. It's more project based, where there's specific deliverables, specific outcomes that we work on. Other clients have me on retainer, where they basically say, we may not need you for a week, we may not need you for a month, but we want to make sure we have access to you when we need it. So it's a hard question to answer in the sense that it really depends on each relationship. So, so I mean, I've sort of got a comfort zone that I work with, anywhere between 3 to 5 clients at once. Doesn't mean I couldn't take on 6 or 7 or 1 or 2, but it really depends on the makeup of the project.
Now, when it comes to streamlining operations and processes, as you mentioned, that's really an operational issue on the franchisor side. So if you're meeting with a franchisee and they're saying, I think head office could be doing this better, I think they could be doing this better, and you actually see it, how do you go ahead and make that case on behalf of the franchisee to the franchisor?
Well, I think you have to see it in more. I mean, it's not like any other base. You have to have a bit of a case study and say, it's not just about, well, I see it. It's what's the impact of what's happening. So I may think that by doing this and this, they may get more money, more customers, whatever it might be. But it's like no other business. Any other business, you have to have a business case. What's it going to cost to make the change? What's the benefit of the change? What's the impact? Who's going to be impacted? Because if you're going to go to the franchisor and say, I think that there's a better way for you to do business, you have to have something to back that up other than just an observational, I watched them do it a couple of times and I think there's a better way. But I think also you've got to go with a compelling case. And you say, this is why I think this is a better way of doing things. So it also comes from a credibility perspective. Is the person that's coming to them with the idea, is it a franchisee who's been successful in the past? Is it a consultant like myself that's been successful in the past? Or is it somebody that's just coming and saying, I just bought a new franchise, I don't like the way it works, I think you should be doing things differently?
Well, those aren't great franchisees to begin with.
Right.
I always say the person that shows up to a chicken wing franchise and says, I'm going to teach you how to make a better wing, probably doesn't belong in that franchise system.
Absolutely.
Now, it sounds you also mend a lot of bridges in some cases, and you help with mediation in some cases. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, sort of alignment of interests, alignment of goals is one of the most important things that you have to think about whenever you're talking about the franchise or franchisee relationship. Because as I gave the KFC example, I mean, as soon as that relationship goes sour, you've got head office, and corporate, which may not want to support that particular franchisee as much as they can. You've got the franchisee, which is saying, well, I'm not getting the support that I want, or I'm not, this business model doesn't work for me, even though I bought into the system to begin with. I don't think it's the right way to do things. And what happens is the impact of that is things just get worse and worse. So if you don't decide to sit down and actually mend this fence, then what happens is you've got really a divide line between the two, where corporate doesn't want to deal with the person, the franchisee doesn't want to deal with corporate or the way that things are supposed to be done. And everyone, as you probably know in your business as well as mine, it takes a lot more time after there's already an issue to resolve that issue than if you had anticipated up front and tried to deal with it right away.
Yeah, and that does make a huge, huge difference.
Absolutely. And it's a lot of mental energy that people have to expend. So it's not just, you can quantify the time and the effort that people have to put in, but it's also a lot of mental energy because you've now got a rift between your franchisor and your franchisee.
Now, what if it's just not solvable, the rift? What if the franchisee isn't a great fit? How do you counsel them that it might be time to exit the system?
Well, I think as a consultant, one of the things that's incumbent upon me is to be honest with my clients. I think that's one of the things that I bring to the table is you have to have those difficult conversations. You have to be comfortable having them. You also have to know the party that you're working with to say, can I have this conversation and how can I say the things that I need to say? But I think that's partly that's what they're paying me for. I mean, they're not paying me just to go along with everything that they say, and if they are, I'm happy to take the money, but that's not an ideal client for me either. I need somebody that's willing to improve, to learn. And I've had to have the conversation with one of my clients where it wasn't so much, it's time for you to get out of the business, but it was a franchisor. And I said, at some point, your business is going to grow so big that you may have to step away from the picture and let somebody that's done this, worked with this guy's company before, actually run the company. So, like I said, I think it's incumbent on me as a trusted advisor to be able to have those conversations with my clients.
Now, when it comes to those franchisees, for example, that may need to exit, is there anything that you do to help them determine the value of their business? Or is that outside of your scope?
That's outside of my scope.
Okay.
I mean, I could sit here and say I do it, but I would bring in somebody in my network that does that for a living to make sure that they're getting the best value for their money.
Now, franchisees that come to the end of their agreements, because there's a lifetime to these agreements and they have the option to renew, but at the end of their agreements, they start to either look towards the exit door or look towards the renewal door. When it comes to those franchisees, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Well, I think it's important, first of all, to make sure you start looking at that long before the renewal comes up. So, if you're starting to look at this a month before your contract is over, you've been in it for 10 years, and you're looking at it a month before, I mean, I would advise them to start looking at it a lot earlier than that, because I think it's also, specifically around a franchisee, it's also a bit of a life decision, right? So, do I want to be in this business anymore? I've been running it for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be. So I think part of it is as much a personal decision as a financial decision to say, am I still enjoying myself? Am I still waking up every morning enjoying going to work? That's part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation is obviously the financial situation, which is, have I been making money at this? Have I met my expectations? Have I set goals and have I achieved them or exceeded them or not achieved them, frankly? And do I see that there's a future in this business? So, the last 10 years were great, but maybe there's a technological, innovation that's coming in that's going to completely change the industry, the business, whatever it might be, and say, well, maybe the next 10 years aren't going to be as lucrative. So I think that there's a lot of different criteria you have to look at, both from a personal, a financial, and an industry perspective to say, is this something that I still want to be in and commit to for another 10 years?
And that also brings us to the next point, which is change. Mm-hmm. And change can be a very scary thing. There's champions of change, and then there's challengers of change. Mm-hmm. Champions of change are usually the franchisors. Challengers of change are usually the franchisees, like the KFC case we were talking about. Can you talk to us about change management and what you do in that area? Absolutely.
I can honestly say that there's never been a client that I've worked with where change has not been an issue, regardless of the project, regardless of the industry, regardless of who the client was. Because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, boy, I hope that there's a huge change in my life today, right? So. And the reason that change is so hard is because people are afraid of the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. So specifically around the KFC example, there's a change management issue there because head office didn't go to their franchisees and say, this is the strategy that we want to implement, and either get feedback or at least give them some advance notice. So from a change management perspective, like I said, it's around aligning the interests of the two parties, in this case being the franchisor or the franchisee. I've done a lot of work on the change management space, and the reality is the main focus around change management, the way that companies can successfully implement change, is by asking themselves a couple of questions. And the first, obviously, is why are we making the change? And what I mean by that, it's a much bigger question, but in the sense that why are we making the change? What's the benefit of the change? Because you don't make change for the sake of change. Presumably there's a significant benefit in doing that. Increased sales, reduced expenses, whatever it might be. Once you've sort of tackled that question, which hopefully should be an obvious one while you're making the change, you really have to start looking at who's impacted by the change and how's it going to impact them. So, if a franchisor is the one that's going to make a change and, we're going to change the marketing strategy, or we want to change the way that the operations are running, they have to start thinking about, well, who's going to be impacted? Again, the obvious question should be the franchisees. But more importantly, how are they going to be impacted? What's this going to do to their day-to-day lives? And how can we best help them adjust to that change? I think that's really what the important thing is, because when somebody comes to you and says, I'm going to change this or I'm going to change that, what's the first thing we all think of? Is, what's in it for me, right? We're all inherently selfish that way, and I don't mean that in a negative light, but that's the first thing we all think of is, how is it going to impact me? So if you're the one making the change, if you think about it, put yourself in the other person's shoes and say, let me think about it from their perspective. If I was in their shoes, what would the impact be? And how can I best soften the blow, so to speak? And I don't mean that in an underhanded way, but can I provide training? Can I provide tools? Can I provide support? What kind of things can I do to make this change more successful?
And when it comes to doing that, what are the top 3 pushbacks you get?
It's interesting because I think the top challenge is really, I don't see the benefit in making the change.
Okay.
And that's really, and that's where, so in this example where you're talking about the franchisor making a change, a franchisee comes to me and says, well, I don't see the benefit, I'm not going to make the change. I'm just going to find a way to circumvent the process, which is usually what happens. If you don't buy into it, you're going to find a way to loophole it and go around it. And the main reason is usually because it doesn't appeal to their self-interest of the franchisee, right? So the franchisor hasn't really found that nugget of information that can appeal to the franchisees. Now, if you're talking about a huge franchise company and there's hundreds of franchises and you've got 1 or 2 people that say, I don't buy into it, at some point you just decide to move forward. But if you've got the majority of people saying, I don't buy it, I'm not going to make the change, there's a reason for it, and usually it comes back to communication, and they weren't advised of the change, they weren't part of the change, they weren't given any opportunity to have input into how this change is going to be made. So the biggest challenge I see is just, I'm not going to buy into it. Nobody's told me why there's any benefit to me. And the reality is, and I've done this a lot sort of in the corporate world, to step outside of franchise or franchisee for a minute. And again, the main reason is there may be huge benefits for the company as a whole to make this change, but there may not be benefits to the individual person. So a lot of it also has to be, you have to make those people feel like they're part of a much bigger, event than just my day-to-day job is going to change, and I don't want that.
Sure. Well, it's funny because we meet people all the time where change is forced upon them due to layoffs, changes what they chose by immigrating to Canada, and their skill set might not be recognized here as it was in their home country. They're choosing to change because they're making an investment, but either way, we're dealing with people that are at that stage where they're choosing change of one kind or another. And one of the things that we always tackle, and I don't know if it's one of the challenges you face, is there's not enough immediate impact. It's too long term. I could start making that change today, but I'm not going to see the benefits of that for 6 months, so I'll just keep doing what I do.
Right.
They don't see that what's going to happen down the road. Do you run into that a lot also?
Not as much, but I could certainly see how that's. I mean, certainly everybody wants to feel the immediate impact of a change. So, if I'm going to have to go through all of this effort, I want to see the impact. What's the benefit going to be for me? But I agree with that, and I think the way that you have to deal with that is to say, well, yes, it may be a bit of a longer term benefit, but if you don't make the change now, you're not going to see that benefit in 6 months, right? Everybody around you is going to be reaping the rewards of the change, and you're still going to be exactly where you are today, which you may be comfortable with, but it's not around improvement. So I think some of the messages that have to get out there is it is about improving your business. I mean, we're talking about business here. There's no doubt in my mind you can walk into the most successful business in the world and find significant improvements that you can make to that business. So I think, especially when you're dealing with a franchisee, the mindset has to be, this is a business. I have to work in the business, I have to work on the business, and I have to work on continuously improving my business.
So it would be fair to say that ACM stands for Agents of Change Management?
That's good. I hadn't thought about that, but yes, maybe I'll change the name.
That's what ACM kind of means,
exactly.
Eh? You are a change manager. You're an agent of change. How do people reach you?
You can reach me. I've got a website, www.acmconsulting.ca. You can reach me through email, andrew@acmconsulting.ca, or over the phone, 416-480-1336.
Thanks for coming in today, Andrew. Thanks for taking the time and for being our guest on Ask Mr. Franchise today, and best of luck with all of your future ventures.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Shawn.